This is a Dreamcast disc and is for use only on a Dreamcast unit. Playing this disc on a hi-fi or other audio equipment can cause serious damage to its speakers.
Dreamcast, up to 6 billion players.
Welcome back to the stage of history.
Why don't we play together?
Hey, it's time to make some crazy money. Are you ready? Here we go!
Please stop this disc now.
Hello and welcome to episode 42 of the Dreamcast Junkyard DreamPod. I am your host, Tom. I'm joined by my co-host, Caleb. How's it going, Caleb?
Hello, Tom. I'm doing fine.
Fantastic. We have a very special guest today. He is the nerd-in-chief, the head of SEGA Nerds and the soon-to-be-released, or imminently to be released, Megavisions magazine. His name is Chris. Chris, welcome to the Junkyard.
Hi there, Tom. Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be on your guys' show.
It's a pleasure. Just watch out for that big pile of broken GD-ROMs next to you. It is a junkyard after all. We don't want to cause any injuries. Health and safety is something that we need to address here. But it's like I say, it's a great pleasure to have you on. I'm a big fan of SEGA Nerds. I've been aware of the website for probably as long as I've been doing the Junkyard, to be honest. And also your new venture, Megavisions. So we'll talk about that very shortly. But before we jump into that, let's talk a little bit about you. Let's talk about SEGA Nerds and your history with Sega and all that kind of thing. So yeah, Chris, talk to us about you. What's your history with Sega?
Sure. So I think probably for like a lot of people, I grew up playing Sega for, way back in the day. And I was actually thinking back this week as to what my first memories of anything to do with Sega was. And I think it was back when I went to my cousin's house one time. And this cousin was the cousin in the family who always got the very first anything, whether it was, any sort of video game system. He always had it first. And I think at the time we may have had a Magnavox Odyssey at our house.
Wow.
And that's what we were playing. But I remember going to his house one day and I went to his room and they were playing this new system. And I remember looking at the screen, it was Altered Beast that they were playing. And it was the Master System version of it.
Oh.
And I just sat there in awe. It looked like one of the coolest things I had ever seen up to that point. And I have never knew that home video game graphics could get that good. And it was one of the moments where I was like, this looks like real life. Where
Rise from your grave.
Looking back, it looked so bad. But literally, I was used to moving around a square white dot on a screen on my Odyssey. And that was the pinnacle of video game graphics up to that point for me. So when I saw Altered Beast, it was an entirely different world, and I was completely hooked and blown away. He didn't let me play the game because he was that stingy cousin, so I had to sit there and watch him play for a couple hours, which I did. But I think that was the first time I remember anything to do with Sega. And then we actually ended up getting an NES before we got any other system. Going like past that, my mom ended up marrying my stepdad, because we were very poor at the time when we had the Odyssey. I think that was just a hand-me-down from someone else in the family or something like that. And so my mom married my stepdad, like a couple years after that, we ended up getting an NES. And that was amazing. We were really excited about that. And I think the following year is when we finally got our Genesis. And so that was really kind of the beginnings for me when it comes to Sega. And going, beyond that, we never kind of pick a side, I guess, between Sega or Nintendo. We always had both systems for, each time any of the companies released anything, we would get it. And we ended up getting TurboGrafx 16 and some other systems. But what we ended up doing, which I really regret now, is that each time a new system would release, we would take our old systems and all our old games, and we take them to Funko Land and trade them all in, so we could get enough credit to get the new system. And so it's a big bummer now, because I look online and I love watching YouTube videos of just people sharing their collections and things like that, because it kind of helps bring me back to, you know, when I was a kid and things like that. And it's very frustrating, because I see these people who have held on to their collections, and I have friends who've held on to their collections, and I don't have any of those games anymore.
Oh, the original ones. They've all gone.
The original ones. Yeah. And so I think that's part of why I've gotten into collecting like I have in recent years, is trying to go back and collect the games that I had growing up that I really loved, sharing those experiences with my kids, and then also going and finding the games that I always wanted, or the systems that I always wanted, but I couldn't get because they're just so expensive, like the 3DO. I love collecting for the 3DO. I really want...
Totally that's my experience with the Atari Jaguar. We won't go into that now, but that's why I collect the Jaguar, because I had one back in the day, but the games were so expensive I couldn't buy new games, and now I can, although they are quite expensive now as well. It's interesting though, Chris, your experience sounds very similar to mine with Sega systems. At the time of the Mega Drive, when it came out in the UK, I had an Amstrad. I don't know if you had an Amstrad in the US, or were even aware of Amstrads, but it was basically like
Amstrad. Wasn't that movie on the ship going to the New World? The Amstrad.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, but this one had a tape deck, so you had to put the tapes in, and you had to press Control and
I
Alt
never
and delete.
understood that. Like, that's aren't all those? I can't believe those still work. Like it's like it's a format that's on this magnetic tape, and yet some of those still work, which it's astounding to me.
Yeah. I mean, we used to put the tape in, you know, press play and any key, and then it would like load a loading screen up as it was playing. And it used to take about half an hour to load games. That's why I'm not bothered about the Neo Geo CD, like having such long loading times, because I grew up with Amstrad. It took half an hour. But yeah, a friend of mine and my brother, a guy called Kevin, had a Mega Drive Genesis, and I remember going around to his house and him playing on Sonic the Hedgehog. I'd never seen it. I'd never seen anything like it in my life that was that good. I was just like, wow, what is this? And he was like, oh, it's overheating now, I've got to turn it off. I'm like, oh, great, thanks. And the weird thing is that I listen to, do you listen to the CU podcast with Pat the Nespunk?
Oh, yes, yeah, I do listen, actually.
I know Caleb does, because we've spoken about it in the past, but both Ian and Pat were speaking about friends that they'd had who were douchebags in the past, and they were both called Kevin. And I was like, I had a friend called Kevin who was also a douchebag. So maybe it's just people called Kevin. I'm sorry if you're listening to this and you are called Kevin and you're not a douchebag, but you know, history tells us that Kevins are all douchebags. But
that's hilarious.
But Caleb, can you remember the first time you saw a Sega system, or you owned one?
As a child, of course, I never had any video games at all until I was like a senior in high school. But basically, I believe the first one was one of my friends, where we would do one of those deals where we'd go ride bikes and then go back to his house and play Mortal Kombat. So that was great. And then in college, that kind of continued because somebody had a Dreamcast. And just Soul Calibur, mini tournaments and whatnot.
Wow, so quite a bit of a gap then between like the Genesis and then the Dreamcast.
Yeah, I think I went over to somebody's house once, and like the Sega Saturn like mystified me, because like it's a game on like this weird like CD thing, and it didn't make any sense. And I know I played one of the wrestling games, but I'm not sure which one it was. But
the Mega CD would have blown your mind then.
Oh yeah, and then and then when I went to another person's house, like I played like Shining Force 1 for the first time, and that was just such an amazing thing. It was so great.
Chris, you mentioned the 3DO. Are you a big collector of the 3DO?
I am when I can find the games. It's really hard to find them. So I go to different conventions, and when I find a seller there, I will usually try to pick up a couple games. The one thing that I've found probably over the last year or so is the eBay listings have pretty much dried up when it comes to...
I actually just sold mine when I did a move. I had to make some tough choices, and my 3DO, which I had a bunch of. I had the original 3DO, and then I had a bunch of the Gold Star controllers. And I think my favorite game was I had the D&D Slayer game for the 3DO, which was really nice. But yeah, I ended up just selling that and my CDI just because I couldn't physically move all this stuff.
Chris, favorite 3DO game? Oh man, put you on the spot.
Yeah, I don't know. It's been a while since I went back and played them. But you know what? But I don't know about a favorite game.
Crap! What was that one game? Shoot! It's the game where you chose either a jeep, a tank, or a helicopter.
Oh, Return Fire.
Return Fire. That's friggin' awesome. I love
good
that
music
game.
as well. Good music.
I've heard really good things about that. I don't think I own that one though. What's the one? I can't. The name's escaping me. It was on Sega Saturn, and it was a Sega CD port though. It's a zombie shooter. It was
Corpse Killer.
It's a Corpse Killer.
Yeah.
I really enjoy Corpse Killer
to
the point where I went out and bought all 3 different versions.
I always like it because I confuse it with Crypt Killer. Because there's Corpse Killer and Crypt Killer, and I like both of them.
Is Corpse Killer the one with it's set in Jamaica or something?
Yes, Corpse Killer is the one with the guys who are "Fupa zombies." It's so bad. With the person who's clearly not a real Jamaican guy. But yeah, and then Crypt Killer was the big arcade game where you shot crappy looking skeleton monsters and whatnot,
just like Death Crimson.
I want to say the Saturn port is actually the definitive version. They went in and added some new elements to it and some other features which were pretty cool into the final version of the game. So
cool. Okay, gents, let's steer the ship back on track and let's talk a little bit more about Sega Nerds and basically the site itself and the origins of the site. Chris, obviously you are the guy who created the site and are the editor-in-chief. And yeah, could you give us a little bit of background as to why you started the site and, why?
Sure. Yeah, it's hard to... I try to think back when we started it, and I can't remember. I don't remember when it was so long ago. But I do remember why I started it, and it was because... I joined the Air Force right out of high school. I grew up in Texas my whole life, never really moved out of the state. Then I got assigned to Montana, which is completely opposite in almost every respect from Texas. I was all the way across the country, and I was there. I had a wife, a young daughter, and I really didn't have a whole lot of friends at the time, so I ended up getting a computer finally, got online and found the Sega forums and met a lot of great people there. I really got into the community and met a lot of like-minded people, and it was great. That was my really first time experiencing a web forum and a community in that respect, and I just fell in love with it. Ended up meeting a few people. In my job in the Air Force, I was a print journalist, so I was doing a lot of writing, and I thought, man, this would be cool if I was able to kind of translate what I've been learning in the Air Force and apply it to video games. I always thought it would be cool to be a video game journalist, and the fact that you could create a tripod site for free and you'd have like 10 megabytes of space seemed like a lot back then. And so I ended up just posting a forum post on the Sega forums and said, hey, I want to start my own Sega website. Who wants to join me? And a couple of people kind of made some kind of half-hearted replies that they might be interested in it. But there was one guy in particular named Graham Cookson who said he would do it with me. Yeah. And we came up with a bunch of different ideas. I think one of the ideas we had for a little bit was called Dreamcast Junkies. And I was even earlier this week, or it was either Dreamcast Junkies or Sega Junkies, but I want to say it was Dreamcast-focused. Yeah. And I can't remember. I don't know if I'm just making it up in my head because it's so long ago, because this was probably back in 2001 when we were doing this, or late 2000. It was definitely before the Sega announced that they were discontinuing the Dreamcast. And so we just made a bunch of crappy websites, basically. And then we ended up settling on one that we came up with called Dreamcaster's Realm is what it was called.
I remember that,
yeah. You can still find the tripod version online today. It's still up there. It looks so bad. But we would just upload... we used Microsoft Front Page 98 to upload the website every day. And I remember getting so mad at Graham because I would go in and add an article. And basically the way it worked is you would essentially have to download the whole website locally, make any changes, and upload it back to the server. And so if Graham didn't go through that process after I had posted an article and he updated it, it would delete anything that I had done previously up to that point. And he did it so many times. I would get so angry at him. And I would write a whole review and I would just lose it. It would be gone. I couldn't get it back. And so it was just so maddening.
I'm actually looking at it now. I'm looking at Dreamcast as well right now.
It's so embarrassing. And then we finally came up, and what ended up happening is Sega, that's what it was. Sega announced that they were going to discontinue the Dreamcast. And it got to the point where we're like, okay, well, there's not a lot more that we can say about Sega and the Dreamcast going forward as far as news goes. They're not going to be releasing any new games or anything like that. But the name Dreamcaster's Realm, it kind of puts us in a tight spot. We can't keep, covering new stuff if it's not Dreamcast related.
Well,
exactly. Some people can. Looking back in hindsight, we were absolutely wrong on that. But so we decided to come up with a new name and make it a blog style because that was like kind of the new thing that was getting really big at the time. I think Joystick was one that I took a big liking to. I loved the format. It seemed way easier to post content. You weren't having to upload stuff with Microsoft Front Page anymore. And so we ended up spinning that into SEGA Nerds, and it was based off just the very basic WordPress blog style. I mean, basically, I think with the very first version, all we did was just replace the original header, and that was all we did. If you go back on the Wayback Machine, you can actually see like the very first version of it. I think it was like 2004 or 5. I can't remember for sure when it was that we launched it. And basically the idea is just that we were just going to post daily news on Sega stuff. And there wasn't really a lot of people out there at the time doing that. And so we thought, hey, maybe we can kind of carve out a little niche for ourselves and we'll just do that.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. And it was weird because we didn't think that we were really reaching all that many people for a long time, and we weren't really trying to either. We were just posting the news as we came across it online, where the Sega sent it to us and things like that. And it was really hard at the time too, just to get them to kind of take you serious, that you weren't just a little 13-year-old kid running this little blog or whatever. And so that took a lot of time too, just kind of making those relationships with Sega, their marketing folks and things like that. But eventually the site ended up picking up and it got to be one of the bigger Sega sites on the net for a while. And it kind of took off and we were really surprised.
Yeah, a similar story happened with me with the Junkyard. I mean, it initially started as a personal blog, and it was just about me rebuying all the stuff that I'd had when the Dreamcast was an actual contemporary system, because I sold it and bought a PS2, and then I saw one in the shop window for like £30, bought it, and then started a blog just to like document me buying new Dreamcast stuff that I hadn't played before. And I never, in my wildest dreams, wanted it to be a big deal or to have a community or anything like that. It was just a personal blog. And like you say, with Dreamcast's Realm and with SEGA Nerds, if you go back at the Wayback Machine, you can see how it used to look. To be honest, it doesn't look that much different now because it's still in Blogger. With hindsight, I probably would have gone with WordPress or something like that. But yeah, it's quite similar. My story to yours, it was just something that I wanted to do as a personal endeavor. It wasn't ever intended to, I didn't think anyone would read it, and then obviously people like Caleb came on board and Aaron, the Gagger Man, came on board, and it just kind of grew from that, really. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of similarity between SEGA Nerds and the Junkyard. Obviously, with SEGA Nerds, you've got a lot more stuff to cover because you cover the whole of the Sega kind of ecosphere, whereas with the Dreamcast, we try and keep it at least, slightly Dreamcast related, and that does become quite difficult at times when there's no news or there's nothing to report on. I think with the renaissance of the Dreamcast recently, with all these new indie games that are coming out, it's kind of helped, keep the momentum going. But certainly with the fact that you cover everything to do with Sega, there's a lot of stuff coming out on the new consoles, and Sega itself is still quite a healthy games developing company. So yeah, I think the choice to move away from Dreamcaster's Realm to, a whole broad scape look at Sega in general was probably the right thing to do. In hindsight, and as it is, it's a great site and gets a lot of attention online. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also kind of tough too, because for you guys, you're always going to have your set audience, people who are Dreamcast enthusiasts. Whereas if you're a kind of general Sega news site like us, a lot of times, like from just a traffic perspective or standpoint, is you're so tied into what Sega is doing right then, because there can be months where Sega doesn't announce anything. And there's just really nothing, and we see that, you can see traffic go down tremendously, and then all of a sudden Sega announced Sonic Mania, and our traffic will spike, and so it's frustrating from that standpoint, just to know that how dependent you are on kind of Sega and what they're doing and kind of the bigger framework of the video game industry. But I imagine it's kind of nice from your guys' standpoint that you're not necessarily tied to that as much, and you're free to kind of focus on some cooler stuff, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there have been some very, very tenuously Dreamcast-related things on the Dreamcast Junkyard recently. Anything that's even remotely, the most very, very remote link to the Dreamcast has been sort of dragged in. But, it's a good community, and there's a lot of stuff going on with that particular console. What I wanted to do now is I want to talk a little bit about Megavisions, and before we get on to Megavisions, a little bit about the history of why you decided to create a new magazine, and also some of the magazines that you may have read in your youth and might have inspired you in some way. So, I mean, obviously, as a Sega fan yourself, I take it that growing up you read various Sega magazines in the US?
Yeah, I definitely did. But I'll tell you what, the one magazine that really changed kind of everything for me, because at the time, I was, like I said before, I was kind of middle of the road. Like I never really picked a side between Nintendo or Sega. I just kind of owned them all. But it led up till right up into the Dreamcast release. And when they announced that, I remember I was in high school. I was working at a grocery store. And one of the great things about that was when I would get off school, I would go and kind of relieve my boss. We worked in the dairy, like frozen food section. So he would have already worked most of the day. And then when I'd get there, I'd kind of take over and he'd leave. And so the good thing for me, I was like 16 years old, 17, and I had little or no supervision. No one was really watching what I was doing. And so I would walk by the magazine rack to look at, when the new magazines would come in every day. And I remember when we got the very first issue of the official Dreamcast magazine in, and it had Sonic on the cover, and I was like, whoa, what is that? Yeah. And so I ended up grabbing one, taking it.
An anthropomorphic hedgehog. What is going on here?
Yeah. And I mean, I was really familiar with Sonic up to that point, but I think I heard, just through hearsay and things like that about the Dreamcast and that they were working on a new system. But then, so I grabbed the magazine, I went to the bathroom and locked the door and tore it open.
Wait a second.
Read it.
We don't need to go any further.
It's probably a PG podcast. But needless to say, I read it from cover to cover. The pages were not that sticky after the fact, but and I fell in love with the Dreamcast. I was like, it completely hooked me at that point. And then I was fully on board with the Dreamcast, and I ended up getting a subscription to that magazine. And for me, I read lots of magazines beyond, before that growing up. EGM was one of my favorites. Game Pro, I read a lot as a kid. Yeah. And Game Fan was another one I really liked.
Here's the thing with Game Pro. I mean, everybody brings up the Game Pro rating system with the faces.
Right. Yeah.
And I got to ask, is Megavisions going to bring that back?
We are not going to bring back faces. No, unfortunately. No, we have our own kind of rating cards. And it's similar, I guess, in a way to the system that they had. I think theirs was like a 5-point rating system.
You heard it here first. Megavisions is bringing back the Game Pro face rating system.
Man, you're trying to tie us in.
That's how you break a story, Tom.
Yeah, putting us in a corner there.
It's great to hear those people's history and experience with magazines like on another continent, because again they do kind of mirror mine. I certainly in the UK, the magazine industry is still massive. There are tons of games magazines, and going back to the time before the Dreamcast, I used to read things like Mean Machine Sega, and Sega Saturn magazine, and Sega Pro, and Saturn Power. All these magazines were great. They were written in such an amazing, like, irreverent, funny style. That's kind of where I get my inspiration from when I try to write funny or, you know, interesting articles. There was a magazine that I used to love, even though I didn't own an Amiga. I used to buy Amiga Power because the magazine was written so well. It could have been written about any subject, but the articles were so funny that I bought it just to read the articles, even though I didn't own the system. It was fantastic.
Same thing for me. I bought video game magazines. Well, I didn't buy them. Usually, if I think they were like 99-cent ones or ones you could get for free. But I would just read old ones just because I was a kid.
So what's the state of play with like print magazines in the US? Because in the UK, as I say, they are still really popular. I buy at least 3 a month. You've got things like Retro Gamer, and you've got things like Edge and Games TM, and even T3 magazine, which is a gadget magazine. What's it like in the US? I hear that there's been a bit of a death of the print magazine. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I think print magazines are struggling a lot right now. I know Game Informer still does fairly well, but I think a lot of that is because GameStop gives each issue away with a copy or a subscription for whatever their GameStop loyalty program is. But aside from that, I think EGM's gone now. If you go into a bookstore, you can get Retro Gamer, but it's marked up quite a bit. It's a pretty expensive magazine. And aside from that, most of the magazines that we loved growing up are all gone. There's just not a lot of them out there. And it's tough because it's been really hard for these print magazines to kind of keep up with the internet. And I think that is really what killed it a lot. And it's just I think that business model just doesn't work anymore. You can't run a magazine on these massive budget because the audience that was there, decades ago just isn't there anymore. You're not going to be able to get it. And I think that's what killed a lot of them.
I think that's a very good point, to be honest. Kids of today are more geared towards like digital, whereas in our day, the internet didn't exist. And so the only way you could get new information about, Shoshinkai or the N64 was to look in Edge magazine or Games Master magazine, the tiny little pictures, and, oh, wow, look at Mario 64, or look at this new game that's coming out. I listen to a podcast, you're probably aware of it, called the Giant Bombcast and also the Beastcast. And a lot of those guys are from the print magazine world, so they generally and quite often hark back at or reference the time that they wrote for magazines and how kind of gung-ho it was and how much money was like wasted on various promotional like items and features. I just find it really fascinating. So, because when I was growing up, all I wanted to do was be a games journalist. It's not obviously panned out that way as a profession, but I'd like to think that people like myself and you two are continuing the trend of what we saw when we were kids, growing up. So there's that to look at, which is quite positive. But what I want to move on to now, Chris, is your new venture, Megavisions magazine, and the fact that it is a new magazine about Sega, but is different from the old school because it is basically born digital. It only exists in digital form. So could you tell us a little bit about how it came about and what made you want to start a new magazine?
Man, it was born out of just an idea, really. Like Graham and I were just talking, and I've really kind of grown a bit bored, I guess, with websites. And I wanted to do something different with what we were doing with SEGA Nerds, and I just wanted to do something that no one had really tried to do, at least that I'm aware of here in any recent time, was to create a new Sega magazine. We just looked back at it and realized, man, it's been so long since it was really a dedicated Sega magazine. And I just started talking to folks. I mean, I have worked on a couple magazines. I've helped out with Retro Magazine a bit to help them get off the ground and did some editing work for them. And so I had some contacts with them, and I was talking to them about just the the practical things of getting a magazine off the ground. And in my job in the Air Force, I worked on the Airman magazine, which is the Air Force's official magazine.
Okay.
And so we went from a print magazine into a digital magazine with that. And so I had some experience with the digital format. And so Graham and I started talking, throwing some ideas around, and just after we looked at numbers, we realized, like, wow, I mean, it's going to take a lot of money to really get a print magazine off the ground. And so we thought, okay, what if we, instead of going print, a physical magazine, what if we try to go digital? And so that was an option for us. And we started looking down that path. But we knew that if we were going to do something digitally, we wanted to do something interesting and cool and different. And so as we just kept exploring those avenues, we started coming up with new ideas and things like that. And with Airman Magazine, that was designed for tablets in mind. And so you could do some really cool stuff with it. You could integrate like video and interactive elements and things like that. And we ended up finding this company in the UK called Magazine Cloner.
Okay.
And what they do is they specialize in taking print magazines and put them in a digital format to be able to add some sort of interactive elements. But their platform is actually really powerful for what it can do. And so if you start with a digital magazine in mind from the very outset, you can actually do some amazing things with their platform. And so we started working with them and developing ideas for it. And that's when we came up with it. Like, this is going to be amazing. Like, we can create this specific Sega magazine designed for tablets, for phones, for computers, and it's going to run beautifully. It's not going to be a flat PDF digital magazine like like other magazines, like physical magazines have, like when they have a digital magazine and you're pinching and zooming and you're trying to flip pages, and it's basically
just a scan of the actual magazine page.
That's all it is
on your tab. Because that leads me to the next question I was going to ask is how is Megavision's going to be different from, say, like a website? So you've already kind of answered the question, but I take it you're going to have like animated aspects to the pages and video embedded in various articles and that kind of thing. Is that along the right lines?
Yeah, absolutely. And so it scrolls vertically and horizontally. So you can get to a various, like, say, review of, so in this first issue, we have a review of Rolling Thunder 2. And so you get to the main screen and you scroll down to start reading the article. And as you're scrolling, there's different like pop-out boxes that you can click on, and it will have some sort of interactive element. Maybe it'll flip around and give you some added information, or you can press another button and it brings up a whole new window that gives you added information. It's kind of like another info box or a sidebar. We can include video. We can include audio. We can actually have scrolling images in there too that you can kind of interact and manipulate with. So say you wanted to have a 360-degree rotating image of a Dreamcast to be able to see what it looks like. You can actually rotate that inside the magazine if you wanted to do something like that. And so, I mean, there's just so many amazing options at our disposal that we can do with. And I mean, we want to be smart with how we implement those things. We don't want to just do them for the sake of throwing all this stuff out there
just because you can do it.
Right. We want to use it sparingly, and we want to make sure it's all right, because really the content for us is what's most important. And the experience and the interactivity portion is really what's there to kind of help bring it to the next level. But for us, content is absolutely number one, and that's what we're doing. So I think if people can kind of get into the magazine, give it a try, it's somewhat hard to envision, like, as I'm telling you this, until you see it in action, until you look at it for yourself, and then it kind of clicks and people get it. Because when we first announced it for our Kickstarter and everything else, one of the biggest things people were saying was that, oh man, I would totally get on board with this if it was physical. I want a physical magazine. We could totally understand that, because I love physical magazines as well. I love print magazines. But then once we were able to get our demo, our zero issue out, and people started actually using it and experiencing it. And then we got a lot of great feedback. Then they're like, okay, I get what you're trying to do now. While I still would love if you guys do print at some point, I am going to totally get on board with this and back it. And that was pretty awesome.
How do you answer people who say, well, yeah, it's all well and good, you've made a new magazine for like tablets, etc., but what can I get from this that I can't just get from a website for free? Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, sure. And that's a valid thing. And I think part of it is just it's a one-stop shop for all, a ton of different content. You get such a wide range of content in one, kind of encapsulating app, basically. And we're also getting some great people on board with this magazine that, you're not getting at one website. Where out there. I mean, we have Blake Harris, who wrote Console Wars. He's writing cover stories for us. He did a really awesome one in this first issue on Greg Johnson.
Awesome.
And he goes into Greg's past, the way I've never seen another article do before. People are going to really learn some things about Greg Johnson, that they probably never did before, and just some of his early influences and how those impacted the games that he created later on in life.
Just for people who don't know who Greg Johnson is, who is that?
Oh, sure. I should probably kind of back up for that. He's the creator of Toe Jam and Earl.
Cool.
And so he made Toe Jam and Earl, Panic and Funkatron, Toe Jam and Earl 3, and now he's close to releasing Toe Jam and Earl Back in the Groove on consoles and PC. He kickstarted that a couple years ago. And so our first issue kind of revolves around Toe Jam and Earl and the renaissance of Toe Jam and Earl. We have that cover story. We have a series retrospective on that. And then we teamed up with the guys at Radio Sega to do an audio interview with the Toe Jam and Earl composer, Cody Wright. And so it's an audio interview for that, which is really cool. But we also have the ability for people to listen to the full Toe Jam and Earl Back in the Groove soundtrack as they read the magazine. There's just like a little playlist button that you can hit play, and it'll start playing in the background as you read through the magazine. And that's like another kind of cool element of Megavisions that you're not going to get, elsewhere. You really can't do that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Do you know what, Chris? I have to say that I will be honest with you. I was quite skeptical when I first heard of what you were doing. I kind of thought to myself, why wouldn't you just like get a PDF, or why wouldn't you just look at a website? But the more you kind of explain what it's all about, with the interactive elements and things, I'm kind of getting an image of, the Apple website when you kind of scroll and it all kind of like builds itself and things move and that kind of thing. And I love that. I think that's a great aesthetic to have. So you're either the best salesman in the world, or you've actually got a really good product. So yeah, I mean, it sounds really cool.
Yeah, and really, I mean, it's if people want to go out and try it for themselves, it's an app, the Megavisions app. It's on all major app stores, so you can go and just go into iTunes or Google Play, search for Megavisions, download the app, and we actually have a zero issue that's absolutely free. The app is free to download. The zero issue is free. You can read that. That has a lot of great articles in it that are it's all original content that we uploaded for free, and it's basically almost just a proof of concept, an idea of what the what the finished version is going to somewhat look like, but more so of the interactive elements and the features that it can have and it's going to have. And so we're going to keep updating that going forward to make it more in line with what the finished version of the magazine is going to look like.
Give people like a taste of what to expect in the future.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
What I also wanted to ask, lastly, is does Megavisions have like a finite kind of number of issues, or is it going to be an ongoing thing, or what?
Yeah, it's going to be ongoing. So we did kickstart 6 issues earlier in July. So we're a bi-monthly magazine. So 6 issues every other month. Which will lead us into November is our first issue. It will lead us into November next year.
Okay, cool.
But after that, we're going to be we're just going to keep going. We're going to keep going forward and see where it takes us. One idea that we do have that we haven't really announced officially yet. We kind of talked about it here and there a little bit, but at the end of this 6-issue run, what we'd like to do, if we can feel that the desire is there, is basically go back and create another Kickstarter project which would fund a premium hardcover physical version of the very best content that we've had in our previous 6 issues. And those would include like all of like super high-res versions of our cover arts, of our original art that we've had in each of the issues, and just all the best content, where it's reviews, interviews, features, things like that, just all the favorite content that people really liked. And so we can kind of give back to those people that supported us, but that said that they wanted a physical version. This can kind of be that. And it's almost kind of like how comic books will create, like kind of like a trade paperback or something like that kind of encapsulates all the content.
Like a
it's
compendium. Like a compendium
exactly.
of the best bits, yeah.
Right. It would be that. And this would give us that ability to kind of give that physical version for those people that want that, because it's still, we like way down the line, we would love to be able to go physical if that could, manifest itself. If we can build it into that at some point, we would love to be able to do that at some point in the future. But right now, we're going to stick to this digital format because we think it's amazing and we think people are really going to love it. But we will hopefully be able to offer kind of a premier physical hardbound book at some point in the future.
You heard it here first, folks. Just don't show it to Sega Europe, because they might have something. we won't go down that road. Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. I know we were going to only talk for about 30 minutes, but we've kind of overrun that by 10 minutes.
Oh, wow.
But before we go, I was going to say, is there anything you want to plug? Obviously, you can be found on SEGANerds.com and on Twitter at SEGA Nerds and Megavisions, and I'll let you do it. Tell everybody where you are.
So our main website is megavisionsmag.com. So when you go there, that's basically it'll take you out to all of the relevant places that we kind of want you to be able to go from. You'll find links to the app on all the major app stores. You can follow us on social media at SEGA Nerds, at Megavisions Mag. Facebook, it's just facebook.com/Megavisions. And those are really the main places that we have that we want people to go to. We also have our own forums on the Megavisions website, which is a great place. And we want to get more people involved in that because it's a good place where we can get ideas like directly from the community, and we really want those. So people, will post up like, "Hey, what about this game? Would you guys like to review that?" Or "What about this idea for a feature?" Or maybe someone to interview. And we've taken those ideas and we've actually implemented those into the magazine. And so we really love interacting with our readers and with our Kickstarter backers and things like that. And so if folks out there are interested in being able to kind of directly talk to the Megavision staff, we're all on the forums there. So go ahead, register and let us know what you want in the magazine, because more than anything, we really want to create Megavisions to a magazine that the community helps kind of sculpt. Like, we want that, people to feel like they have a say in the magazine. And we're going to be announcing some ways that people are going to be able to do that even more so going forward, where they can kind of have a direct influence on the types of games that we review and things like that. We really want to. Exactly. Exactly.
Hey, Chris,
so
Chris,
we'll do that. What's up?
I got $1 million idea.
Oh, no.
Special issue. Megavisions, the magazine, VR edition.
Oh, wow.
And you actually you swim your way through the articles, and Sonic jumps out and scares you because he's all 3D and whatnot.
I think that would make people's eyes bleed.
Yes,
and bad things like that.
It's the Sonic from that, that recent PC game that was like that. Do you know what I mean? It was when you sat on the couch with Sonic. And like
come on now.
He's ultra creepy. And
we're all pretending that didn't exist.
Right, guys. Again, Chris, it's been amazing having you on. Thank you very much for coming on and telling us all about Megavisions and Sega Nerds. It's been very interesting. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
No problem at all. As ever, you can find loads of other Dreamcast stuff on the Dreamcast Junkyard. That's www.thedreamcastjunkyard.co.uk, and also on Facebook at facebook.com/the Dreamcast Junkyard. We've also got a group which is interesting at times with stuff that people post. Join the group and have a have a bit of a laugh. We can also be found on Twitter at the DC Junkyard. You can find me on Twitter at Tom Lee C. You can find Caleb on YouTube at
Blandco. I'm doing a new series of videos on very cheap alternatives to D&D miniatures. So if anybody's interested in that, that will be ongoing until the new year.
Fantastic. And as Chris said, you can find Chris on Megavisions and on SEGA Nerds. Chris, do you want to give out your personal Twitter, or is that...
Sure. It's at Baron Von Powell.
Baron Von Powell. Do you know what, Chris? I recently bought myself a title on the internet, so I'm now a lord. So from one lord to a baron, thank you for appearing on the show.
It is my pleasure.
And on that note, we shall leave it. But thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you on the next DreamPod. Everybody say goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Make some crazy money. Are you ready? Here we go!
Please stop this disc now.